Welcome to Super Woo Radio, where we are awakening into being free and sovereign. It's a place where minds hurt and hearts sing as we break through the barriers that have been holding us back. So be prepared to have belief systems confronted as we take the journey of the truth seeker and explore the answers to life's biggest questions. Remember, truth is stranger than fiction. So come along for an awareness expanding experience with George and Jason.
Hello and welcome everybody to Super Woo Radio, episode number 10. Today we have a guest that both Jason and I have held in very, very high regard. We have a deep, deep sense of respect for this gentleman. We are totally blown away with his ability to articulate himself. It is truly amazing how he does so from the heart, from a place of authenticity, which you know I definitely hold in the highest of regard, from a place of just being raw, genuine and real, and has this amazing ability to walk between the worlds. So without any further ado, I would absolutely love to welcome to Super Woo Radio, Neil Kramer. Neil, welcome, mate. How are you?
Well, thank you. I'm very well, thank you. That's a lovely, warm invitation. It's great to speak with you again, George. We had a great time the first time we met, and it's good to be here.
We did, didn't we? Yeah, there was definitely a kinship going on there, and your lovely wife, Maren, what a beautiful being she is.
Thank you. Yeah, she is.
The four of us just seem to have this nice, easygoing sort of feel about it. Neil, it is truly an honour to have you on Super Woo Radio. I'm flying solo today. Jason's been caught up with some very heavy workloads, so I am going to fly solo for the first time and looking forward to it. It's a joy to be doing it with you, Neil.
Brilliant.
So what I want to ask you is, you know, this seems to be, or for me to listen to the way you speak and the way you express yourself is really, it's refreshing to me. Like I said, because, you know, you and I are both big on authenticity. It's part of the core message and the essence to our teachings and the wisdom that we want to share with the wider community. But I want to ask you, was there a specific experience in your life that triggered your drive to embark on this journey of the seeker? Because um, you were working in software, you had this career in software, and that's kind of like a bit of a paradox if you think of the way it is, but it isn't, because you can think of the way software, because I've got a computing background too in the 80s when I worked in the computing industry. Um, you know, this hard line, hard edged binary system, and the way artificial intelligence works with its hard edge to it, either is or it isn't, and nothing in between. There's not really much give or grey areas in the world of artificial intelligence, or in the version of artificial intelligence that we're exposed to. So during that process, well, was there a particular incident that occurred that changed your direction in your life, or was it brewing prior to that? So if you could just tell us a little bit about
Sure.
Neil and give us a bit of an understanding, that was there a specific event in your life that helped you to
Yeah,
embark on being the truth seeker?
sure. I get asked this question. I'm sure you do as well, now and again, and I always try and give a different answer, just to give a different angle on it. It's the same truth or whatever, but a different angle on it. So let me try and do that again. The answer is no. There wasn't a single thing. There wasn't a trigger. There wasn't like a sort of 9/11 wake up call of any description. It was really from the beginning. I just looked around at the world, probably when I don't know, that kind of indistinct age where you move from childhood to being a young man. So, you know, your teenage years or whatever, as you go through adolescence, maybe. And I sort of realized that the freedom and the openness and the adventure was in danger of coming to an end, right? And I thought, oh, maybe that's just the way it is. Like when you're not a kid anymore, you stop playing games, you get to work literally, and you start to close down opportunities and possibilities. And something inside me just said, well, that's true, but it's nothing to do with childhood, and it's nothing to do with the aging process. There's no chronology in this as such. It's part of a sort of shutdown that every human being is asked to participate in. And I think that's very true. And looking back on it now, many years later, of course, I think I was right. So for whatever reason, thank you, whatever powers or forces or guardians or intuition helped me feel that. But I rejected that from the start. So although, like everyone else, I had to go through the process of conditioning to some extent, I always kind of was playing along with it. So like the undercover agent in the spy movie. Yes, I was there in the office. Yes, I was going to college. Yes, I was paying the bills and doing all the things that everyone else does. But I wasn't buying into it, and I never did do, not even when I was, involved in quite serious, business in the corporate world with major companies and sat in boardrooms in London and Germany and all over the place. Even then, I wasn't really part of it, and I was just kind of observing it and waiting, in a sense, for when I knew was the appropriate moment to get out and to do something about that. But I have since found, and I wrote about this in my book, The Unfoldment, I since found that it was actually very, very valuable that, because if I'd not had that personal sort of up to me neck depth in that world, I wouldn't really be able to appreciate what everyone else is having to do. So whether it's like, you know, posh professional jobs like doctors and attorneys and, brain surgeons, or whether it's teachers or bus drivers or plumbers or electricians, I have a knowledge of what that is, having worked in very lowly jobs myself and then kind of more high end, respectable kind of jobs, as people would see it. I appreciate what that is and what that means and what effect it has on people's consciousness. Um, and it has helped me to deconstruct it from within, basically, because I had to do it for myself. I had to unwind a lot of bad thought and examine it and edit it and delete it. Say that is just nonsense. I'm right. I'm going to delete that. And various things that we're asked to do, such as, well, basically from 20 to 60, you're supposed to work really, really hard. And then round about 60, 65, 70 maybe, then you can stop, and then you can start to play golf and go on little holidays around the world and go on a cruise and eat some yummy food. And I just thought, that's bizarre, because obviously when you get there, for the 40 years of your life has disappeared. So I just thought the whole conception, the proposal that the system puts forward to you, that we accept, by the way, but the proposal is live not now, but at another time. And I realized that postponement of life was a con, basically. It was a scam. And it wasn't unintentional and it wasn't unwitting. It was actually by design. So I realized that for some strange reason, there was this control system that was actively suppressing human expression, human joy, human growth, human dignity, all those fundamental things that make humans really interesting entities were being sort of squashed, right? And I just thought, that's just odd. So, that leads you then into conspiratorial research and a lot of
Yeah.
shadow work, a lot of taking your little candle into the darkness, and really getting in there and thinking, what the hell is this about? And one has to be very careful doing that, as I think you and I have talked about, and you must see this in your travels. We do come across people, do we not, who have got lost in the caves of
Oh,
darkness.
very easy to get lost in. It's quite the labyrinth, and there's the whole thing is one big drama vortex. It wants to suck you in there and keep you there, and actually be a proponent and help to propagate the ideas and the notions within that realm, within that
Mm.
constructs and ideas. It really can be quite the beast that gets its tentacles into you, and we've got to be careful of that.
You do, and even the very wisest and most well-intended men and women who look at this, I've seen them fall foul of it and just
Mm,
become very negative orientation. Their energies of a very negative aspect, and they are just really examining threats to themselves and their families and their communities, and examining coming threats in the future and past threats. And it's like, it has an effect on a person when that's all you do. So I think in my stuff, in my work and writing and speaking and whatnot, I always try and emphasize the fact that that's a kind of finite process, because you do reach a point where you think, okay, there is a group of people and there are also a group of other entities which don't really fall into the category of people. It's something different, which perhaps we'll come to later. And that complex of intelligences, it find it beneficial to keep mankind at a very low level. And in my view, that's been going on for about 25,000 years, roughly.
yeah.
And every now and again, that resets. And it's kind of at a very, very high level, a really sort of galactic consciousness level. It's kind of a game. It's a
Mm,
game of growth. But at any individualization of consciousness where the unit of spirit is individuated and you are a person, you are George, or you are Neil, or you are this, or you're a tree, or you're an eagle, whatever. As soon as you get to that level, the game is very real and has an importance. And part of the solution to the game is actually to neutralize that negativity through understanding that it isn't correct, in a sense, to completely cling to the positive. And it isn't correct, of course, to completely cling to the negative.
mm,
But to some extent, you have to map both of them. You have
mm,
to understand the principles of each. And this is in the Western esoteric tradition, all these occult and secret schools and whatnot, and theosophists and Rosicrucians and Gnostics and Kabbalists and all these guys. One thing they had in common was that they recognized that and they
mm,
saw that, and they said, well, there has to be initially a deconditioning process to get all that rubbish out of your head from the system before you can start to make moves to neutralize it. And when I say neutralize, I'm talking at a primal energetic level. I don't mean taking up arms or any nonsense like that.
mm,
And in that way, it is very similar to the Matrix in that the con is so vast and so deep and such a shock to the system that the reason most people aren't awake is because they positively choose to remain asleep so they don't have to deal with it. Because as soon as you unravel the first threads of this thing, the whole thing starts to come to pieces.
oh yeah.
And you can't really live the same as you used to do with
You
any
can't.
sort of sincerity. You can't do that anymore. You
It is
can't go
like
to those.
it is like
Go on.
taking the red pill, isn't it?
It
You
is
know?
because as soon as you pop that sucker, you can't be just chatting away at the dinner parties anymore and going to cast your vote for the fantastic local political representative. You realize that that's all a charade and it
Mm,
doesn't really mean anything.
mm,
And it's a very fundamental thing. And I think some people, for whatever reason, have an inbuilt resilience to that and just think, well, if that's the way it is, I'd rather know that and then do something about it and live differently than live in ignorance. And some people have that, and some people don't have that. They don't have that uh, natural resilience or courage or whatever because it's kind of been drummed out of them. But it is my conviction that with the right support and encouragement and empowerment, all human beings do actually have that. It's just dormant. And when they get the confidence to exercise that empowerment and that strength and that sort of sovereign divine ordinance and that self-determination,
Mm.
You can do anything, and you can say, yeah, the system sucks, it's stupid, I'm not part of it anymore. Let's do things differently. Let's meet real people, real alive human beings who are choosing their own destiny. Suddenly becomes an exciting proposition rather than a threat or like some dreadful nightmare. It becomes an adventure. It becomes something to think, well, thank goodness, because that makes sense of all the violence and dreadfulness and weirdness of the world. It makes sense now. I understand now why that is.
Mm.
And I can do something to change it. I can actually do something to change it. So it's quite the adventure, really. And I think that one's perspective of it, if you've gone through that process, as if I may say, people like yourself and I have done, our responsibility really is to say, listen, guys, this is doable. This is actually doable. We're not perfect. We don't know the answers, but we have trodden a path that has given a certain independence that is very bloody useful these days. So let us, in our most humble and sacred selves, share the common wisdom of this that belongs to everybody. It's not George's and Neil's necessarily. The journey of George is unique to you. The journey of
Mm.
Neil is unique to me.
Mm.
But the wisdom that we're laying our hands upon, I don't know if you feel this, but it's not ours as such. It's something that we've discovered and said, wow, look at this, everybody. And like
Mm.
the old wizards wandering around on the planet are thinking, look at these two Muppets. They think they've found it. This is 50 million zillion years old. It's the oldest thing. It's divine truth reflected in the world. It's never new. All wisdom is old.
I've often said, Neil, that I'm actually not teaching anyone anything new here. I'm not. And I'm
Mm,
just providing the triggers for people to remember. What is new is the wisdom that they've gained from this lifetime. There's no doubt about that. That's new for each and every individual. But the huge, massive ocean of greater wisdom of life, that's been there for a very long time. And
yeah,
I'm gonna just quote you for a moment, because it kind of relates to where I just what the questions and the direction I want to take this conversation to next is important for people to understand about the power that we have, and what Neil's referring to is about, that we are co-creators, that we, once you get to this place of wisdom, we can now co-create, but from a different platform, a different place, a different level of wisdom. And it does become fun. And we do realize the opportunities now that lay before us in our path. So, I've often said that life is a participatory process. We are co-creators. What do you have to say to the people who are not participating in life? The ones who are just waiting around for something to happen. Because I want to quote you now. This is Neil saying this. The mundane is where the action is. So can you elaborate on this concept? I think it's brilliant.
yeah. The domestic situation that you have in front of you, your friends and family, your kitchen, your toilet, your shoelaces, your snotty nose, all the most unglamorous pieces of our life, those components that you think, well, this isn't really the spiritual bit, is it? This is something we need to clear away. This is something we need to wash away so we can get to the spiritual thing. Those things, the domestic, logistical realities of your life, the prosaic they are as well, very commonplace things, we all have them. They represent, in a very immediate and astonishing way, the contents of your sense of self potential. Your consciousness projects your immediate reality out and says, if you ever wonder where you're at, what you're up to, this is it. And I'm going to reflect it in the immediate concrete reality of your life. This is where you're at the moment. This isn't what you are necessarily.
Mm.
And it
That,
certainly isn't what all that you're capable of. But this is where now, currently, you are at with all your warts and your belly hanging over your jeans belt and the spot on the end of your nose, all the funny little things of life that we would rather sometimes weren't there. They're reflections of a very high dynamic, a very sacred principle to say there's always a lot of work to do, and it's a bit like life is the circumstances of our life. It's a bit like you sat at your desk and on the wall in front of you, there's all these post-it notes with little reminders of things, all different colours, giving you notes about things you're learning, things you need to improve, things you need to destroy, things you need to create. And each one of those post-it notes is an element in your life, is actually an element in your life, your relationship, your job, your health, your finances, your body image, your degree of friendship, your capability for intimacy, your capability for enthusiasm. All those things are post-it notes, concrete post-it notes to say, look at this. You need to take a look at this. This would be good. This is part of your path. So we literally dream this stuff up into existence, and it has no more reality than the dreams that we have at night. No more reality than that. What it does have, however, is a consistency. And because of that consistency, we call this real. We say, well, this is the real world. It's real because it's consistent. Every day when you wake up and look in the mirror, you look largely the same. You wake up in, the same place, and you open the closet and there's roughly the same clothes that you always have. And we call that real because it's consistent. But it's only consistent because this higher stratum of consciousness is holding it there in the same way that a school principal would hold the curriculum and the school year and the semester there for us to go through it. And then when that's been completed, it no longer needs to be held, that space and that consistency.
Yeah.
And so the permanency of that dream then dissolves. And we call that death. We call that part of the process death. And we have a very funny view of that. But it really is a point of completion, that to say, well, in the given set of circumstances, you have now done what is required right now with those elements. And there is a reckoning based on every moment of every day, I view, in a sort of very natural way, that we ourselves adjudicate to say, how well did you do? And there's a threshold. And if you get it wrong, it's no problem. And you come back and have another go. And in certain esoteric traditions, they put a number on how many times you do that. One of the numbers is 777, for example, which is very specific and funny, really. But you get a set number of times to do it, and everybody goes through that process. So for me, the mundane is it's very unwise to ignore that, especially the things that are annoying or painful. Those are big clues, really big clues to say there's a dynamic hidden in this thing
Yeah.
that is more important than practically anything else. We can all go on incredible journeys to the Tibetan mountains and see the guys doing the, levitation, or we can go to Avebury or Stonehenge or West Kennet. We can see the crop circles. We can go to the pyramids. They're great things. We can all do that, but they have no more importance, none at all, than what goes on in your very own personal domestic affairs. That's where the action actually is. The other things are vacations from the action.
A vacation from the action. Yeah.
So if you go and spend 3 weeks going down the Amazon with the shamans, having your ayahuasca, Pepsi Cola, and whatever, it's great. That's brilliant, and it's a worthwhile experience. But that's a vacation from the work. That isn't the work. The work is creating a harmonic representation in your physical life of your inner life. And if you think there's a great big gap between the two of them, then there's a lot of work to do, because there should be a small gap between the two. And then
Wow.
eventually it's all.
Wow, that is brilliant to identify that, because I often talk, well, I'm writing about it too now, the subtleties of life. It's the subtleties we tend to have this resentment towards our life because, and especially towards the subtleties, it's like we become immune from them or numbed from them, or we don't no longer have the ability to recognize and read the way this reality is speaking to us all the time on so many levels. And in the mundane and the subtleties of what you and I are discussing, it's brilliant because We are in sensory overload in this matrix, and if we kind of being programmed and conditioned to receive constantly. That's the whole agenda of the program of the matrix. So we don't seek, we just sit and receive our instructions, receive our orders. And in doing so, we're missing out on the subtleties and seeking out those subtleties and identifying them and knowing how to decode them, to translate them into a working and understanding wisdom and knowledge about where we're at with life and what we need to do,
Yeah,
because it
yeah.
comes down to the inner world. Because, like, let me just say this to you, Neil.
Mm.
You are definitely one who enjoys traversing the landscape of the mind. There is no doubt about that. And but I will say that I feel you also enjoy traversing the emotional landscape. And I'm going to go as far as saying that you are one of the most adept navigators, and and even can I call you a tracker of not only these two types of landscapes, but the entire environment of the inner world and inner landscape, because this is the key to for people to have realizations about themselves. Is they're waiting, because it's the externalization. It's like the the irony of the path of the truth seeker. We go out there and we go to the pyramids, like you said, and we go to the sacred sites and we read these books and we do this and do that. Yet the irony of that is we're still externalizing, but when we can get back into this inner world and inner landscape and know how to traverse it, know how to navigate it, know how to track within that environment, within that landscape. And I feel that you are one of the most adept at this. And this is what I would love for you to further elaborate. It's what you've been doing, but to help people to
Mm.
understand, because there's listeners who are waiting for something to happen. There's listeners who are just stuck and don't know what to do with themselves. And I know you can give them some tips, some advice, some information to make them realize that not to feel so disillusioned, because there's a lot of disillusionment at the moment.
Well, yeah, thank you for the lovely compliments as well. I very much appreciate that. One does one's best with these things, and as I've said before, and as we were chatting just before we started the recording, making mistakes is very important,
Mm.
and kind of demystifying the problem that society has with falling over and getting it wrong, making errors. That's something immediately that one has to get over, that you have to throw out as failure. There is no failure when you walk the path. There isn't any. That stops. That's one of the nice
Yeah,
advantages of this thing.
yeah.
There's no such thing as failure anymore. It's not like a business that either succeeds or fails, either has a great profit or goes bankrupt. That doesn't exist in this. There is only learning. And many of the worst crises in our life and the tremendous collapses and um, real serious problems of life and death and birth and divorce and cancer and all kinds of shocking elements like that, when you walk the path, those things all become part of it and all become acceptable and all become something that you can deal with. Some of them can be transformed into other things, which is a great gift. We call that alchemy or healing or whatever. And it's really taking one energy and saying no and changing it into another kind of energy. And that's
Mm.
something that we all can do. But some people have managed to retain the skill of that in the modern world, as you say, which is so saturated with information and this signal, the unreality signal, I call it, that confuses our memory of how to do these things. But yeah, I mean, you often hear people say, life is a gift, the gift of life, the gift of being a human being. And it is very true that. And I'll tell you what the gift is. The gift is an understanding. And the understanding is your life is literally a sort of dream feedback loop to constantly show you where you're at. So it's your life is like your heads up display. It's like the readout in your aircraft that says, this is your altitude, this is your bearing, this is the distance, this is your velocity, this is the cabin pressure, this is that, this is your heading, etc. All that stuff is showing you your spiritual trajectory, your progress, your development, your depth, in a sense. And literally every element of your life, you're dreaming it all the time in real time into being. But it is a dream, as I say. I'll reiterate this point because it's very important. It has no more reality than the dreams that we have at night. It really doesn't. I promise you that. And the exciting thing about that is that it is eminently editable. You can change anything you want, really. And literally the only element that prevents people from making those changes is their contract to disempower themselves. When you sign that contract with the system, with the construct, with the distortion, you say, I am just me, and I'm just a guy, and this is my income, and this is what I do, and these are my limitations, and what the hell can I do to change this enormous, huge reality? Nothing, really, nothing at all. Maybe every 4 years I can vote. Maybe that's the best thing I can do to make changes. If you buy into that, and it's a vast contract that's signed in tears and blood and sweat and spirit, if you buy into that, then you forfeit your right to edit the dream. You say, I don't want to edit. I just want to go with whatever is thrown my way. I don't want to be involved in the production of the movie. I just want to watch it. A quarter of my work, still to this day, 10 years after starting doing this sort of seriously full time, is spent on changing that perspective for people. Because without that, the rest of it's just a hobby.
Brilliant.
Just play.
Brilliant.
You have
Because
to change that perspective before you do anything else.
yeah, Neil, if I can just interject,
Absolutely, please do.
mate, the way you present it, you say it's the concept of consenting to our own victimhood. That is, and our own diminishment, our own victimhood and
Yes.
our own diminishment. So, can I ask you, is it similar to what I call taking responsibility for our co-created experiences? So, would you say it's something along the same lines?
I think it, yeah, it's hard to say no to that, really. I think when we say co-creation, we have to be a bit careful, because for someone who's seriously looking at what that means, no problem. But for someone who just hears those words and think, oh, I'm a divine co-creator and consciousness creates reality. You hear people parrot this and they don't
Yeah.
really know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
To be in a position to create, you have to attain a certain equilibrium of selfhood, right?
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is you need to, if you pardon the expression, really have your shit together before you can do anything. And until you've got to that point of balance, which is really a precise and beautiful and rare thing, to be totally honest with you, you're not allowed to create anything. So what you do is you participate
Yeah.
in a storyline, and you have a degree of free will, and you can go left or right or fast or slow, and that's good enough, quite frankly, for most people. But to actually create, that is not to transform energy from one form into another, but actually to bring something new into the mix, because after all, that's what creation is. If you bring something completely new in, then that's an enormous change to the system. Enormous change. It's like putting a new line of code into a program, an application.
Yeah.
If that's wrong, it crashes the whole thing, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
So it has to be, you have to have an appreciation for the rest of it. So you have to have yourself together. You have to be psychologically healthy. You have to be emotionally honest and open. You have to be intellectually capable. You have to be physically true to yourself, and all these things. You have to be a whole person, basically. It's not very hard to do left to our own devices. But if, depending on what country and what kind of culture you live in, the culture itself is impeding you from doing that. He's saying, we don't want you to be a whole human being. that's a tremendous nuisance for the control system. That having whole humans walking about is very, is very much a nuisance. It makes it all very difficult to govern. So what you want is people who are a bit scared, a bit disempowered, and really looking for somebody to tell them what to do, which is exactly all the control system ever needs to do. And all the higher beings who are involved in this, and I use the word higher very loosely, um, they they know this, and it's quite a simple con, really.
Yeah.
It's just having people who don't believe in themselves and don't have conviction in their own world-changing power, who don't understand that and think it's a bit of a dream. So that inner work is very, very important, and the balance necessary for that is where you start to create in the world. But yeah, it's a dynamic that is easy to demonstrate to anybody, really. You have to just take them out of their habitual environment, unplug them from the language of the mainstream, the language of the corporate media, the language of the political echelons. You have to extract oneself from that and go to a place, usually the natural environment, a wilderness area of some description, where there is no transmission of unreality, where there is an organic reality signal, a strong one, particularly where there's, like I say, there's no human presence. You get back to the closest thing here that we have to the divine signal, which is what we call the natural world, or organic earth, if you like. And there are some complications with that, which we're not going to terribly go into right now, but there's some bugs in the system. There's some errors in the matrix, even in the organic world. There's some weird stuff going on. And one of the sort of side projects for the person who is engaged in awakening is, while you're there, maybe you can help fix some of the problems that are inherent in earth technology, in organic natural world technology. So there's an optional side project while you're here to say, when this was created, there was a bug in it, and the lack of harmony in the system and the predatory nature of this solar system isn't normal. It isn't normal that most systems don't have that, but it's been kept this way, and the Gnostics wrote heavily about this, because actually, rather than just deleting this part of the galaxy and saying, well, that didn't go too well, let's scrap that and do something else, it actually serves as the most incredible training school
Yeah.
for the spiritual adventurer that exists in the universe. This is it. We're in
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. I wholeheartedly agree. And it's very, very challenging, and it really is. Everybody who's here has walked the path of the brave, as far as I'm concerned. It takes a lot of courage to incarnate into such a reality.
It does. It does. Everybody we ever meet, however much of a newcomer they are, or an old hand, or whether they're a wizened old dude or a fresh-faced young kid with new age paraphernalia, I congratulate everybody on that. Really, I just say, well, anybody who's trying, anybody who's looking, anyone who's continuing to look gets my support, however gross or inept that sometimes might be. I don't care. I support those people and just say, well done, fantastic,
Mm.
absolutely brilliant, keep doing it. This is it. This is the only thing. And then when we do come across people who have wisdom and mental acuity and spiritual adepthood, then that's a great joy, because they inspire us to keep getting better ourselves and saying, wow, there are some incredible people here who are totally detaching from unreality and becoming champions, really, of humankind, which is a refreshing thing to hear, isn't it? Because we often
Oh yeah.
diminish ourselves, but to say there is something amazing that human consciousness is capable of, and let's fully realize that before we get out of here, and then we'll do something else.
Yeah, and that's that key concept that you share of consenting to our own victimhood and our own diminishment. Like that realization, you've worded it differently to the way I did, and it's got a different element to it. It's an element that the broader community can understand to the way I express and elaborate myself. So I love the way you've worded that, because it's simple.
Well, that's the way we have to do it. I mean, there's a certain sort of person who listens to all the whatever 1,000 different speakers on the things that we talk about. Let's say there's 1,000 guys and girls out there doing what we do, right? Let's just put a number on it.
Mm.
Each one of those people speaks to a different sort of mindset and demographic and background and ethnicity and cultural viewpoint. And that's the wonderful thing about this, that really all we're doing is agreeing to channel, just like the old school channelers who would sit there and grab hold of some consciousness and throw it down the pipe. The difference with us is that we're doing it from source. We're not doing it in a mental capacity, which can be very dangerous, as I think you know.
Yeah.
But we're doing it in a core capacity at an energetic level to say the channeling that I'm bringing down the pipe is conduct and is authenticity and is nobility and is honor. There's no voices required, right, on this. There's no secret messages required. This is a channel of a pattern, and it's a pattern of harmony and refinement and growth and elegance.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do my best to make that part of my life, not just some funny story that I'm going to tell you on a stage with a microphone, but actually something you'll see when you stand with me and when we walk through the town together or when we have a beer sat at the bar. It's as naturally part of one's life, or it should be, as it is one's philosophy or the books that we write or whatever. If you cannot bring it into your life, then it's a hobby. That's my little mantra for the moment. And there's nothing wrong with hobbies, and there's plenty of people who have to play around with that for decades before they realize that it's more than a hobby. But when you transition from it being a spiritual pastime to it being a way of life, you have to edit some things in your life and change the dream. And that means changing the people in your life, frankly.
Yeah.
It means changing your circumstances. It means changing your livelihood, your finances, your resources, your nutrition, your books, your music, your clothes, everything changes.
Yes, it
And
does.
that is why most people don't really want to do this spiritual awakening business, because they're not ready for that just yet. They're not quite ready. What they really want is to be a bit happier, a bit thinner, and a bit healthier. And if you can give them that, that's good enough. But actual transformation is a hell of a thing. It's a very radical business.
Yeah.
And there's a great tradition for the last few hundred years, particularly in Europe and North America, of people being satisfied with having a teacher or a guru and saying, well, that's the guy who does it for me. I don't want to do it, so I surrogate it through him. He does my
Brilliant.
transformation for me.
Oh, brilliant. Brilliant. Oh, you nailed it. Oh, crikey, Neil. This is fantastic stuff. You absolutely nailed it.
You know it's true though, don't you? Because
Oh, yeah.
people do it all the time.
They do. We've done it in the past. People
Oh
do it
yeah,
all the
everybody
time.
does it. It's just you have to catch yourself doing it first of all, and then you have to have the balls to say, right, I'm going to stop doing that. That's crazy. And that's everybody has to go through that process. Everybody.
And William Shakespeare just summed it up so simply: to be or not to be, whether 'tis nobler to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. That's it right there in a nutshell. And if people have the courage to be, you will suffer slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, of the sheep turning around and judging you for being different, for wanting to leave the patterns and the and the dreary, robotic, repetitive programs of the herd. We start to become individual. We start to become autonomous. We start to become sovereign. We function from a place of divine will, our sovereign divine will. And
Yeah.
this is where we just become a completely different person. And because our inner world has now changed, the outer world changes on all levels, and all of what you described before does take place. And you're absolutely right. So many people cannot do this because they haven't the intestinal fortitude to go through with the process.
Yeah, that's right. And we have to be supportive and compassionate to an extent. I mean, I'll be honest with you, sometimes it's very frustrating to see people continually throw away and disregard their own power and self-determination. It's frustrating to see that, and sometimes I just think, I'm done with you, bye bye, right? Now, when I get hold of myself and get myself together and shake myself down and think, okay, everybody has to go through the process of marshalling themselves, their abilities, and saying, you know what, maybe I can do this. Maybe I don't need this person or this lady or Christ or Buddha or Krishna or Muhammad. Maybe I don't need those avatars to transform and to know truth and to attain this blissful nirvanic heavenly state, whatever. Maybe the creator, the divine source, would much prefer it if I did it myself through my own actions and my own discoveries, however little or great. They're mine, they are mine. And maybe that's a much better way than joining a cult or a group or a society or whatever and doing it through that. Now, there's nothing wrong with being a Christian, and I'm not just saying this for political correctness reasons, I don't do that ever. But you can be a Christian and be an incredible human spiritual adventurer. There's no reason why not. You could be a theosophist, you could be a Mason, it doesn't matter. It's your sense of individualism and your sense of self-determination and sovereign will, which is the magic key here. And if you have those things, then you can be anything, do anything, be a member of 10 fraternities, 10 religions, do whatever you want to do. But if you ever hand over the contract of evolution to somebody else, then you forfeit your ability to change your own dream, and you fall into the predetermined dream world of somebody else. And I have a very strong suspicion that if you do that with any of the main Abrahamic religions, you do end up in a potential risk situation of going to a hell realm that is not somewhere you want to be, but has as much reality as this does. And that's the reminder, because none of those places are permanent. Nothing is permanent. That's the reminder to say, wow, that was an enormous mistake, being such and such a religious person and thinking that this guy was the savior, and my adherence to his doctrines and philosophies and my worship of him and my diminishment of self to substitute my own power for his power. If anybody makes that mistake, I respond to that with acknowledgement and say, yeah, that's easy to do in a way. That is easy to do. But don't make it more than once, because it takes an enormous amount of time to swing back round from that. So we have to have a bit of compassion, because there is an argument as well that I sometimes trot out, which is all those people going to church and being Jehovah's Witnesses and Presbyterians and Mormons and whatnot. At least they're doing something. At least they have some sort of spiritual life. At least they recognize other powers outside of the mundane, three-dimensional chronology of the linear world. They say, well, there is that, but there's something else as well. I'm not sure what it is, but when we go to this funny building on a Sunday, we talk about it, and we have these holy books who proclaim to have a inside track on this stuff. And so I find it comforting to sit on the pew, sit on the bench, and go into that world for a couple of hours on a Sunday. I still think that's better than doing nothing, because it's part of the journey. It's the first few steps and the first few foothills of the mountain range. And you might go through a few lifetimes of that and think, well, that was good, but there's more, there's something else. And our elders in the church don't know everything, and I thought they did. How disappointing that is. They can't tell me the secrets and the esoteric meanings of these Christian text. They can't tell me because they don't bloody know. That's very frustrating.
Mm.
So sometimes, and I've come across these people leave the Christian milieu because they've realized that the pastors and bishops and elders and priests and vicars and whatnot don't know. They actually don't know. So the realistic, enthusiastic spiritual student who has just as much reverence for the divine as anybody else, including those Christian teachers, saying, well, I'm out of here. I'm going to go on a journey of my own design and find out what this divinity is about and what its presence is on earth and what its history and origins are, because the church has been unable to share that with me. So I now leave that church and go on that journey on my own. And as I say, with as much, if not more, reverence and respect for the divine presence in life as any pope or archbishop that you've ever laid eyes on. So I have a deep respect for people who have the balls to leave their religious traditions. We don't have it a lot in Australia and Britain, to be honest, George, do we? But in the States, it's much more fundamentalist. It's much more part of life. Like 70% of Americans identify themselves as having some sort of religious connection. And so here, it's really funny, particularly if you go in the southern states, it's a very powerful influence in people's lives.
Yeah. Yeah, it is very, very powerful. Here in Australia, it's I would say it's far more passive, but
Mm,
the underlying infrastructure of our society is that system.
mm.
It's really
That's a great point. That's a great point. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
the apathy seems to be more of the dominating um, influence here in Australia, I would say. Australia, I would say, is running the most advanced system, because if you look at the way the society and the civilization that we're living in went from the amalgamation of different groupings in the European area, then went to build the new model in the Americas there, in North America. But then they came to Australia, and this is the newest model, and it's been refined. And I feel that the model that I've chosen to live in here is the most refined model of society, of civilization, that this group that spawned out of the European and the Caucasus area a very long time ago has really refined it to a very well-rounded product. And apathy is definitely their main weapon as far as I'm concerned.
It's a very powerful weapon, that, isn't it? A sort of indifference to, like, yeah, well, maybe 9/11 wasn't 19 Arab hijackers, and maybe JFK wasn't assassinated by Oswald, and maybe we didn't go to the moon, and maybe there are thousands of off-world intelligences with a long, rich tradition of history with contact with Earthlings. Maybe that's all true, but you know what? I just don't care.
It's
It's
exactly.
very powerful, that, isn't it? You can't argue with that. It's like they can go on sit in an audience and listen to this wonderful speaker, George Kavaslis, with all these incredible stories of personal accounts of contacts and wisdom and knowledge and breaking through the illusion, and think, wow, that's great. What a fantastic guy that is. And then they'll go home and forget it all because they can't imprint that into their everyday life. And it's the same with me and anyone else. There's always somebody in the audience who is really just going to hear a tale of doing things differently, but doesn't genuinely feel that that can be applied to real life. They think it's something different. And so, more and more in my work, although I know from a business point of view, a commercial point of view, if I just told all the fantastic stuff about ultra dimensionals and off-worlders and great trips to all these different parts of the world, and giving people a vicarious existence through my adventures, although I know people love that, and I know you know the same thing, George, but that's what people want to hear sometimes. But I always make sure there's just as much stuff of saying, right, let's look at how we stamp this stuff into your actual real felt experience of life.
Mm.
How does this affect your marriage? How does this affect your driving down the freeway. If you can't evidence your philosophy and your spirituality in the affairs of your everyday life, then it remains outside of the dream. It remains something unreal. So you have to be able to bring it right down at the end of the day into it. And that means that indifference
Fantastic.
has to go
Fantastic.
away.
That's brilliant, because you've answered the question that I was going to say. How do we reconcile that information and that knowledge and that wisdom that we're sharing? How do people reconcile that into their lives and integrate it into their lives and implement it in a way
Well,
that's going to be beneficial?
you have to give examples, don't you? Because, very often people, I got an email from someone the other day who said, I enjoyed what you said about this, this, and this, but when you said, how do we deepen our consciousness? How do I do that? And I sort of laughed initially. How, somebody asks you, how do you deepen your consciousness? But then I thought, well, that's a serious question.
Yeah.
And it deserves a serious answer. But the answer is a big one. And so I said to the guy, I acknowledge your question. And I said, and it's a very important question that. I said, I'll tell you, firstly, it's a bit like saying to someone, I hear there's this thing called a piano. How do you play it? You cannot email someone back and say, well, there's this big thing and there's like white keys and black keys. And when you press your fingers on those keys, it makes sounds. That is how you play a piano, right? Now, technically, that's true, isn't it? But
Yeah.
really, the adventure of learning to play the piano is 20 years' work, at least, to become proficient at it. It's like, here's this guy, here's some books, here's some students, here's some performances and recitals, here's 5 different kinds of instrument, and I'll see you in 25 years, and then we'll reassess that question. And you have to be respectful in giving someone the seed of a real answer, but knowing that actually what someone has to do with that seed is go away and spend years in their own life with their own experiences, with their own knowledge. You can't give it to somebody, and it's not fair to pretend that one can. You have to say, the beauty of this place is that we're all as clueless as each other at the end of the day. And the only thing that one person has over another is a confidence in their own progression. And that's the only thing that I have over the guy down the street who is, worried, sick about what he reads in the news every day. He doesn't have confidence in his own conscious evolution. I do in mine, because I've seen the reality of how it's made my life better. And that's it. And that's all we're really teaching people to do. And
Yeah.
perhaps, as we'll talk about in the second hour or whatever, what people like you and I add to that is to say, well, just as by way of inspiration and by way of perspective, let me share with you how big this picture is, how big this story is, because it often goes beyond the 3D. And that's something that I know you and I do in our work, separately, but there are certainly some parallels, I think, as well.
Oh, incredible amount of parallels in our work. Incredible amount. I'm just, my heart sings with joy when I look at your material. And my heart sings with joy when I get the opportunity to actually converse with you. And I'm singing with joy at the moment, Neil. This is brilliant. We're gonna take a break now. In the second hour, we are going to delve into some pretty deep, serious, juicy stuff. Before we go to the break, Neil, can I please get you to share the information so people who want to explore Neil Kramer further, they can, and I really recommend that people do.
Yeah, thanks. NeilKramer.com. That's NeilKramer.com. Neil Kramer with a K. If they go to that website, there are lots of interviews, essays, free downloads, videos, product downloads like workshop audios and books and whatnot. All manner of things on there that reflect what I do. All kind of real media, I would like to say, real solid consciousness in there. And if anybody has found some of the things that I've been talking about interesting, I'm sure they'll find something useful on the website. So that's NeilKramer.com.
Oh yeah, look, your ability to navigate the inner world is just absolutely astounding. And what you do have to share, your wisdom has real, genuine substance, and I just love that. Absolutely love that. And your book that you've written too, I honestly have not read it as yet. I'm not a bookie, as you quite well know, and I let people know all around the world I'm just not a bookie. And
You know, it's funny, George. You know, one of the funny things about this game is that whenever we speak to our colleagues, like we're doing now,
yeah,
none of us ever read each other's books.
Yeah.
That never happens. It really doesn't. So I admire your honesty in that, and I haven't read yours either. But you know what? It's a funny thing because when we sort of, and I say this hesitantly, it's not as necessary as normal because we have the privilege and advantage of being able to waffle with each other for hours and hours and hours, and we probably transmit a good 70% of what's in our books to each other in conversation. So I think we all sort of know that secretly inside. But yeah, my book, The Unfoldment, covers a lot of the things to do with this inner work and selfhood and some of the big themes about the dramas going on in the world and some of the control and stuff, but like not letting ourselves get our knickers in a twist over that and realizing that we have this power. So my book, The Unfoldment, covers what I think are the sort of key aspects of that. So anybody who wants to get up to speed on that, you know, that's one way of doing it, is grabbing that from Amazon or Barnes and Noble or wherever.
Fantastic. All right. Well, we'll see you on the other side of the break, everybody. I am pleased to announce that the music for this episode comes from the latest release from Medwin Goodall and his fantastic new album, Emerald. For more information and availability, go to medwingoodall.net.
Welcome to ourjourneyhome.com.au, a place where we are awakening into being free and sovereign.
We are submersed in a construct that was designed to break us and keep us broken, but it hasn't. It failed. We still go on because we were designed from an eternal template of infinite creativity and not a synthetic house of cards built on pride and false power. Breaking free from the programs and paradigms that hold us down takes courage, endurance, tenacity, and trust. The reason it is so hard is because to be a free and sovereign being, we have to smash every lie, even if it hurts. It is good to be reminded of how resilient, unbreakable, magnificent, and powerful we truly are. And if anything provides a foundation for that, it is the book, Our Universal Journey. Go to ouruniversaljourney.com.au. Welcome back, everybody, to hour 2 of episode number 10. We're here with Neil Kramer. What a fantastic discussion we're having. Talk about depth and substance. Loving it, absolutely loving it. Thank you, Neil, for your incredible wisdom. I do have a question that I would dearly love to ask you now. And that is, can you please share with us the different dimensional levels in the universe? For example, 3D, 4D, 5D, what have you, and the associated beings and their characteristics with these different levels in the way Neil Kramer understands it. I would dearly love to hear that.
Sure, yeah, I'd love to talk about that for a minute. I think before I just dive into that one, I think it's important to explain to people how somebody who lives in the 3D, shall we say, the third density, the third realm, how can somebody who lives there, just the same as everybody else, talk about these other realms with any sort of conviction? And that's a really important starting point, that. And I'll tell you my view on it is that you can only speak authentically about the realms that you've been to yourself, that you've actually been to, right?
Yep.
And as a human being, it is my understanding that it's feasible for you to go to all the preceding realms and the one next to you, i.e., the 4D. So it all depends on one's formulation of how many levels you think there are to this thing. And one way I've begun to describe it is that it's a little bit like a rainbow, in that you've got red and orange and yellow and green and blue and violet and all these different colors. And actually, they're not really separate from each other. There's no one single point where red stops becoming red and becomes orange. That doesn't exist. But we put an arbitrary division line in there just so we can talk about it, just so we can think about it.
And label it.
And in discussing these realms, I think it falls upon one to be obligated to just say that, because there are people who think it's a doorway that you walk through and it's a totally different dimension. It isn't quite like that, in my view. It is a vibrational thing, it is a resonance thing, and it is to do with the speed of consciousness in a very real sense. And so one might say that the first realm, which I call them densities, because the density of a thing is affected by the speed of its vibration. So if it wiggles around really, really slowly, we could say it's a dense place. And if it wiggles around really, really fast, it is a less dense place. And you have to be careful with this, because a physicist or a chemist or a biologist would debate what some of these terms mean. But I'm speaking just in plain English, and just saying that this first realm, we could say, it's kind of like, I sometimes call it as like being in the sense of undifferentiation, like radiation emanating through space, or like the ocean on a planet. It's undifferentiated beingness, it's undifferentiated consciousness, and there's a slowness to it. Now that doesn't mean it's bad. It doesn't mean it's worse than fast. It means that's what it's doing. That's the part of creation that it is examining by its existence, right? And then as you move up, you move into the second differentiated layer, which is animal, mineral, vegetable kingdom. So I would say, and this is again from personal experience, that if you use plant medicine in the right manner, with the right knowledge and techniques, which are not commonly available, wherever you go, you have to find extraordinary, excellent people who are willing to share that with you. But if you take those medicines into your body, what they do is they share their resonance with you and say, well, this is what it's like to be me.
Yeah.
This is what it's like to be a vine or a mushroom or a cactus. This is what it's like at this particular mineral or vegetable resonance. This is what reality is available at this point. So the second density realm, rather than being kind of not very good, is actually fascinating. So a lot of higher dimensional experiences that people have are actually second density experiences that they have miscalculated, which is fine. But if you have a 2D voyage, it is unbelievably amazing. It is unbelievably different to this, and people therefore assume that they have ventured into a higher spiritual realm. Not necessarily so. So that's a good one to note. The third density is where we live, self-aware being, where there is a self-reflection, a self-determination element, where one's sovereignty is graspable, you might say, where we have a very particular quality of self-awareness, which isn't necessarily the same in the second density. So here you get the opportunity for the first time to say, right, I'm going to design the voyage. I'm going to design it myself now. Because if you're here, you've already, in my view, been through this enormous, enormous journey through the first and second realms. So to be a human being is a tremendous achievement in itself, in a way. And it doesn't all necessarily take place on Earth, I might add. And in some esoteric schools, it does take place in other parts of the solar system. But because the densities are different, we can't see them. We can't necessarily detect them. So although I'm associating second density consciousness with a plant or a mineral, it might be something completely different on a different planet that we have no conception of. So it isn't isolated to those things. They are synonymous with those things. So that's important. Anyway, the bit that is most interesting to other people, I cannot help but notice, is the fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh densities, right? Now, again, I'll be totally honest with you. I can tell you quite a lot about the fourth density because I've been there quite often, and I have made it part of my life to develop the skills to take my self-reflective Neil Kramer consciousness into that realm and back again, right?
Wow.
Because I've known one or two
Brilliant.
people who've been there but didn't come back. So to come back again is quite important. And when I speak of the fourth density, I speak from personal experience. Probably, let's just be a bit Virgoan for a minute. Probably 70% of my knowledge is derived from personal experience, and 30% is from what I would personally consider as trusted esoteric sources of the last 400 years in particular, because what the Europeans have as an advantage is a tremendous mastery of language that really came about in the 15th and 16th centuries, or particularly the 17th actually in Germany. Our sophisticated language for the first time began to illustrate metaphysical and mystical concepts to a great degree, high degree of specificity, which we didn't have in Buddhism and Hinduism and early Christian thought, not quite in the same way, right? And the only thing that makes that better is because it's more closer to where we are now, right? So some people might enjoy the Upanishad poetic language. I do, but I don't find it particularly useful. I think it's really beautiful, and when you've done a lot of work, you can pull out the truth of a thing from the poetry. But to the newcomer, the Upanishads are incredibly unhelpful, whereas 17th century German mysticism can be brilliant. It can catapult you forward years just with a few bits of study. So the fourth density is characterized, in my view, by non-physical energetic being, i.e. you don't quite need form as an anchor in the way that we do here. So you don't wake up with that consistent form all the time. And the temporal flow is very radically different. The way time works, it's almost as if there isn't any time. I think, as far as one could ever know here, that there is time there, but it's, from our perspective, it's as if there is not. So time is relatively unique in the way we experience it to the first three densities, particularly the third one. And I often describe time as a mechanism to show people the effects of their consciousness on the world. So a bit like time-lapse photography, it speeds it up or slows it down to say, look, this is what's going on. So just to make sure you don't miss it, we'll go in slow motion and we'll show you the effect of your mind on the world around you and on your life and on what happens to you and what happens to other people. And we'll slow all that stuff down for like 80 years, 100 years, over the duration of your life, so you see it, so you don't miss it, right? And then when you've done that sufficient amount of times and you go to the next density, which everybody does in the end, then that's no longer necessary because you stay here until you've learned that stuff. So if you have to stay here, in my view, indefinitely without graduating, as you might say, then good, because you don't want to be in the 4D with sloppy consciousness. It's not a good idea, that, because you end up creating all kinds of havoc for yourself and other people. So it doesn't really happen very much, that.
Yeah.
Now, the fifth, sixth, and seventh, I would say multi-dimensional being in the fifth, where, as with the fourth, we lose the necessity for physical anchorage. In the fifth, we lose the necessity for individuation. You don't need to be George or Neil anymore. You can be both. And you can define your existence by your multidimensionality in a much more practical way than ever before.
Yeah.
So polarity begins to recede there almost completely. So it's not possible to go into that space, as you might say, as a solely positive light worker or as a solely negative shadow entity. You can't really do that. You have to find balance as the doorway into the fifth.
Yeah.
The sixth is where you get real creation. The seventh is where there is the merging back with the unitary source, with wholeness, with divinity. The so-called angelic entities are there. So I think when people speak of I had dimensional encounters with this from this dimension and this from that dimension, my personal advice on that is not to worry too much about the number, what number somebody says it is, because that's very arbitrary. It's very personal. It's a reflection of one's own reality tunnel. What's important is the content of the story or the account that the person's giving you. So if you hear George stand up and say this, listen to the content of it. If you hear Neil say this, listen to the content of it. That's what's important. The way we and people like us define these things is always our version of it, naturally. And I don't think people should get hung up on that. You know, occasionally in an audience, someone will say, well, you said this thing came from the fifth dimension, but I heard that it came from the fourth dimension. And I'm
Yeah, I get
like,
that a lot.
you know,
But it's amazing how much overlapping there is when you express your own personal experiences of these different dimensions, and the way I've been explaining it too. It correlates. There's correlation there. There's synchronicity there. There's harmony there. And I just feel really comfortable. And of course, decoding it with our earthly personalities, it's not going to be exactly dot for dot. There's going to
no.
be some variances in there. That's a given. And the listeners need to realize that, and we're coming from our different journeys in the universe as well. So there's all that influence in there as well.
Yeah, and I think we would like to think that people who follow you and follow me and other people, they will have a certain maturity and will realize that, and we don't need to really say that. But there's always newcomers. And really, when we specify this stuff, we're speaking to those people who might not know that and think, well, George said there's 9, Neil said there's 7, which, who's wrong? That's not a good question. A better question is, well, what are the commonalities
Yeah,
in how these guys characterize these things? Because surely that's where the interesting bit is.
yeah,
Because I have a very, very wise friend in Europe, just to place them very roughly, and they are absolutely certain with me that there's these 13 very distinct realms. And every time I say anything to the contrary, he kind of tears his hair out, and he's absolutely sort of crucially focused on the fact that each specific realm has these very distinct purposes, and it's very important that we understand them. And he shows me how in Kabbalism these are reflected very accurately, and there's a science behind this, and I understand what he's saying. But my argument is, well, there might be one realm, there might be one dimension, and only one, and all our models of reality are just ways of describing orders within that one realm. And I think that's probably true. But as human beings who are inevitably caught in a linear way of thinking right now, not permanently, but temporarily at the moment, yes, we are.
And just
If we,
not just linear, sorry to interject, but also
no, it's okay.
compartmentalization.
Yeah, absolutely. We have to, particularly if you're a guy, to be honest, you split things down into little sections and you systemize and formulate and synthesize. And it helps a lot of people think that, quite frankly. It really does. It helps a lot of people think. If you just go and say, it's all about love, we're all one, we want peace and joy and bliss, and let's all grow and create, that isn't tremendously helpful for an awful lot of people. That actually turns people off. They need some sort of bridge between the world of unreality and that journey to a more complete ecosystem of life. So for me, it's like saying if you've only ever lived in New York City and you've never really set foot outside of Manhattan and all you know is concrete and tarmac and glass and chrome and buildings and commerce, imagine what a different world it would be to be dropped into the desert, the mountainous deserts of Afghanistan, or the lush forests of Canada, or the humid jungles of Ecuador. Imagine what an enormous difference that would be.
Yeah.
So when we speak about these things, you can be very specific about these numbers and realms, but only to help us think about things, only to say, consider a realm that is very different. And so using the word realm is actually quite useful because you don't have to say density, space, dimension. You don't have to give it numbers. You don't have to say anything. But ultimately, I think the point is with these realms is that it's very important to consider the reality that not everything that goes on Earth is in the third density, is in the 3D. I think that's very important.
Yeah.
Now, I don't need to tell you that, but there's a lot of newcomers who come to our work and think, it's all very well when they talk about selfhood and confidence and empowerment and psychological balance and all this. But when George starts going on about the bloody such and such a people from a different star system, and when Neil starts going on about ultra-terrestrial beings, then we lose the picture there. Then that's a bit much for some people.
It is.
So I understand that, but I will continue to do what I do, because unless you recognize there is this fourth layer to our ecosystem of life on Earth, then you miss out half the picture. You miss out the real design element and the real direction of affairs on Earth, because it doesn't come from the 3D. The 3D is the result of it, but the actual direction and where our higher self resides most of the time right now, and where other entities have an interest in the affairs of mankind, none of that's in the 3D. There's occasional visits. You get people who come in, assume form, do stuff, and then go out again, right?
Yeah.
But most of the action isn't here. It's in another part of the natural order, another part of the ecosystem. So I think we must continue to explore that, and risk ridicule and people laughing at us and people thinking that we're just zany mystics or something. That sort of ceased to bother me a long time ago, really.
Yeah, same.
Really,
Same.
I'm not bothered about that. All I'm bothered about is what I have seen in my own growth, and I share that publicly. And if people wish to listen to it, they can do, and if they don't want to, they don't have to. so I'm not really bothered about that. But as long as you found it, as long as you forge your experience into your sharing of that, I think you can't go far wrong. Because if somebody prefixes a statement by saying, well, this is what I see, this is what I feel, this is what I have experienced, you can't argue with that. Whereas if somebody stands up and says, right, let me tell you how it is, then you've got a problem. Straight away, you've got a problem. And nobody should be saying that. But I've seen you stand up on a stage and share some incredible information, fantastic information, and challenging information, where some people in the audience are weeping with joy and some people are walking out the back door thinking, "Oh my God, what's this guy on?" You know, and that's the same for everybody. Now, fortunately, 99% of our audiences, by nature of who they are and who we are very, very open-minded. So they will entertain all our concepts and theories in a very mature and considered manner. But there's always one who can't handle it. Do you know what I mean?
There'll always
And
be some who just don't have the capacity.
that percentage is
Mm,
always of great interest to me,
mm.
because I think, I mean, when I say they walk out the back door, I'm not speaking literally. I'm speaking figuratively. But when we lose that person, that's always of great interest to me, because I just think, what was it? What was the threshold that we crossed where that guy went, right, I'm out of here. I can't deal with it. And it is usually guys as well. Women are far more open-minded, aren't they?
Yeah, they are.
But the guys who are very solid in their thinking and need this systemization of thought, where is it that we lose them with this stuff? And that's a question that I keep asking, and I've not arrived at a satisfactory answer for everybody yet, because it's slightly different for everybody.
Mm.
But one of the things that challenges people is that if the universe is this great vast place with all this different kind of intelligence, and most of it non-human at a very high level, then they would need to reevaluate everything that they've invested in their own life. And if they've made heavy investments in logic and science and human endeavor and the primacy of human consciousness over everything else, then it's a lot of work to withdraw those investments. Whereas I would hazard a guess, you too, never did make those kind of investments at a heavy level. So we didn't have an awful lot to withdraw because they weren't made for whatever reason. So asking questions without investments is a hell of a lot easier. And so previous investment, the fact of, as they call this, previous investment in certain theories and certain paradigms, those people have a tough time because you are questioning their wisdom about their previous investments, which makes people very uncomfortable.
It certainly does. Very uncomfortable. It literally creates pain internally, not only in the mind, but also triggers an emotional reaction, and they even experience physical pain in the head, in the body. It really is a very, very powerful program, this program of limiting human awareness, and it comes in many forms. And the alien program is colossal. The interdimensional program is colossal. Very powerful. It's like people say, I was with you for certain concepts, but the moment you mention that word alien or extraterrestrial or interdimensional, that's where you just lost me. And in fact, I started feeling a form of resentment towards you because you mentioned that. So why are these people triggered that way? And you come to realize that there are programs that have been disseminated throughout our societies and that create very rigid mental framework structures within the human mind. And they are designed as trigger programs to react to certain words, trigger words. And these programs get activated within a person's mind. And you do get these reactions.
You do, and we have to be, therefore, clever with our language and with our delivery. Because it's very easy to say, look, I'll just speak to the people who already are with the program and ignore everyone else. But do you not think, George, that sometimes there's a great amount of satisfaction of speaking to the people on the fence and saying, look, lend me your ear for an hour or two and let me ask you to look at some things. And if you go away with some question marks, that there's more deep fulfillment in that for me than there is for a big Neil Kramer fan who just had another wonderful couple of hours. To have someone who's a fence sitter who I have politely asked, can I ask you to ask questions of your own life? If they agree to that's very satisfying, isn't it?
Incredibly satisfying. We're getting emails from people that just, they've come across our work recently and they are just so jumping with joy inside and out because the pieces of their puzzle just got put together and they feel it in their heart. And, they've been seeking and searching for most of their life and finally they can have a bit more of a rest and go more in that inward journey now, because their external journey, that journey, the irony of the journey of the seeker, always seeking, always searching outside of ourselves, starts to come to an end. And then there's, a peace about that, because you start your inward journey and begin your, traversing that inner landscape. And then there is a very, very tremendous feeling of accomplishment on my behalf that people begin, that transformation.
Yeah, and it makes our own stuff sharper as well. It makes our own game better, because we realize that it's not difficult to get George Cavassalis fans in a room and educate and entertain them for 2 hours. That's easy for you. But what is part of our work, might I suggest, is to speak to those people on the edge who want to come in, but need somebody who has a grounded attitude to fantastic, incredible information, who can say, look, I know this is freaky. I know this is really, really challenging, but trust me on this. It's worth consideration. I don't know all the answers with this. I have made some voyages. I have had some contacts, but it really is worth your consideration. And the language is important. I mean, I use the terminology ultra-terrestrial quite a lot. And I say, let's take an example of a well-known ultra-terrestrial entity, Jesus Christ, who is a being who descended from a higher realm through love, interested in helping the consciousness of mankind. And though he was a man, he was also operating at a completely different dimensional level, emanating from another place. But he took upon form, he relinquished that form willfully, and then he ascended back, and then he returned again. So we had all kinds of little interdimensional travel. And though he's no longer physically present on Earth, let's say he was a real man for a minute, maybe he was, maybe he wasn't, but let's say he was, his spiritual presence now still interpenetrates the consciousness of half the planet, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And in this respect, I say that Jesus can be fairly considered as an ultra-terrestrial being. So if anyone has a problem with that, then you can stop right there, because that's an easy one for a lot of Christians to say, well, yeah, maybe he was. And the question is, well, is there only one Son of God, or is the Bible telling us that we're all the children of God, which I think it is, and it's saying, look, you're all part of me, you're all inseparable from me, but let me characterize and emphasize that in the journey of one individual, this wise person who, the story's got very confused since that time, but let's say that's what it was. Then Christ says, look, guys, this is what's possible. Look how awesome I am, and look at all the shit I can do, and look at the fantastic ways that I can express myself, and look at how I can use my psychic faculties and my human faculties and my intellect. Look at it. This is what's possible. We can all do this. Anyway, I'm out of here. Good luck, and I'll see you later. It can be as simple as that. That's an ultra-terrestrial being who's not afraid to show it.
Yeah. It. I hear what you're saying, and it is a very, very powerful message. Every religion on the planet has this incredible, powerful message interwoven within it. If we can see past the unfortunate twists and manipulations of the priestly caste, but there is that thread of truth that has come through, and that's what I choose to hold on to and to identify with. So I totally agree with you there. I do want to ask you a question just to change the flavour of the subject a little bit, back to the 4D realm, because you speak of this concept of beings having to go backwards. It seems similar to what I call the road to compression, which is what we've all embarked on. It is, in a sense, undoing, but really integrating one's journey through what is known as the labyrinth, and also what I call the great arena or the universal matrix, and relates to the mastery 4D beings appear to have, and the consequent trappings of being enamored by the glamour of one's own self-serving light. So what can you share in relation to that?
Well, there's in my experiences in the greater natural order that borders this piece of the ecological system, in the fourth realm, let's call it that for the moment, there are definitely negative beings who don't consider us or regard us very well at all. And it's odd that, because you can sort of feasibly say they are, quote, higher beings, in that they have power and they have what looks like godly powers to
Yeah,
the common man, and they do.
they do.
And you think, well, why is that okay? How can they ascend to such a level of ability and such great capacity of attainment by being unpleasant and, if you want to use a very old word, evil? How can that be? And because the fourth realm borders this one, the way to answer that is go and have a look and find out for yourself. That is the answer to that question. Have a look, find out for yourself, ask questions. You're going to get your ass kicked a bit, but you'll be okay. Find out for yourself, find out why this neighborhood is a bad one. Go and visit it. Do some study, speak to people, check it out, feel it on your own skin, feel the hairs stand up on the back of your neck, come back and go, wow, right, I've got a feeling for that now. I can begin to answer that question. My understanding of it is that polarity, that is the teaching mechanism of positive resonance and negative resonance, or to put it in natural terms, creation, positivity, destruction, negativity, are neutral forces. There's nothing better about creation than there is destruction. If you're going to build a new house, you might need to destroy the old one to make way from it. It's not a negative act in and of itself. It's just something that happens. Things are created, things are destroyed. It's the pulse of life, that, and it's completely okay. We look at a case of destruction where it seems to be brought about intentionally for selfish purposes. We call that poor behavior or evilness or something, right? And when you see that in the world, we tend to associate that with badness. And it's certainly feasible for an entity to go through the whole enormous landscape of the first, second, third, move, transition, having done thousands of years in the third, transition up into the fourth, lose the necessity for form, and find oneself taking still a very negative path, because you've only just got your self-determination and your self-awareness yesterday in galactic terms in the 3D, and then suddenly you get too big for your boots. And you realize that domination is a fast path to power. The dark path, the left-hand path. It's a very fast and effective way. If I were a businessman, if I were a man of commerce, I would say, take the negative path. It's a lot faster and the payoff is quicker, right? That's the
analogy.
The sort of gangster capitalist view of negative entities. There's a problem, though, and it's a considerable one. The Christians would say you need to sign your soul over to Satan or something like that, a pact with the devil. And it's not far off the mark, that, because if you go that negative path, there's this penance associated with that, which is a very real one, which is there comes to a point where you cannot go any further in the 4D. And you might think, well, who cares? Because they have this kingdom, this dominion of unimaginable beauty and excellence and pleasure and all kinds of vices and sexual shenanigans that would drive anybody to temptation. You think, well, why would I bother ascending any further? The answer is you can't create anything still in the 4D. You can only change what is there. It looks like creation because I could take an apple and turn it into an elephant. That's nearly creation. It's as good as. But when you've done that 50 zillion times and you've tasted every taste and had every experience, been to every place, you get bored.
Yes,
and
you do.
You realize that there's an emptiness in materiality, even though it's less dense. And there is a problem with being omnipotent when there's no progression and no creation. So there's no newness. There's no distinct newness there. There is only transformation, endless transformation. And so there's a problem. And the universe safeguards against letting anyone stay there permanently by introducing this thing that we call entropy, which is that all systems, all energetic configurations move toward their end. As soon as they're created, they're beginning to dissolve. Just like a tree or a human being or a sun or anything, it comes and then it goes away. And that's entropy, right?
Yep.
It's the rhythm of the universe.
Yep.
That makes certain that no negative being is eternal. It cannot be. It will move to its end. So the negative beings who found themselves in these majestical kingdoms, as dark as they are, have a big problem, a big power problem. Just like someone who lives in the desert in Nevada. If the power goes off, you've got a big problem because you can't cool your environment, you can't heat your environment, you can't put a light on, you can't cook, and there's no natural resources anywhere around. So there's a big focus
Dependency.
on
Yeah.
dependency. Thank you. Dependency. There's a big dependency on a power source. And to cut to the chase, the negative entities, and I think this is true for nearly all the ones that have been classified in the esoteric literature, and certainly the ones that I have had direct encounters with, have that problem. And what they have done is made a acknowledgement, which is aeons old, that a good substitute for power and a close approximation for it, which will keep them going, is low resonance human consciousness.
Yes.
To have a planet farmed with 7 billion people on it who are diminishing themselves by their own lack of nobility and dignity and growth and divinity is a brilliant power source. It's like having the hugest oil well that just keeps on spurting its black, juicy goodness endlessly up into the air, waiting for a corporation to just suck it up. That's what's going on. And it's an old game, right? And I would even say it's not particularly personal. It's not particularly personal. It's not evil. It's not bad. It's just part of the bizarre architecture of how this works. And in a way, these demons, shall we call them, as the Gnostics might say, are in a bit of a mess. I wouldn't swap places with them at all. They're in a mess because although they have this power, their only way back to wholeness and real progression to the next phase of their evolution is to go backwards. And you can't just go back.
Yeah. To relinquish that
You
power.
can't just to
And
relinquish it. Yeah.
And it's like death for them to try and do that. They can't.
It is because there's a possibility, and this is very hard to know, quite frankly, but it is spoken of that you can't just nip back to the 3D, make some changes, and then carry on. You have to go right back to square one, which means back to the first density, which is an epic millions of years, trillions of years, who knows, voyage to say, I've got to start all over again because I polarized myself by accident and ended up going on this path of negative, destructive domination. And it doesn't work. So to learn equilibrium, to learn the center point, you have to start again. And they are not willing to do this. So there's an enormous bitterness and resentment, which is the overriding emotional frequency of negative beings, is a resentment and a bitterness and a hatred. But it isn't necessarily for mankind. It is for their predicament. They are in a terrible, terrible position and would do anything to sort of fix that, short of going backwards, which few of them are prepared to do. So that's part of the conundrum of negative beings. But they can't really do an awful lot to physically interfere or emotionally or spiritually with our progress as long as we don't consent to it. So their trick is to disguise their presence in the universe to hide it so we don't know they're there, number one. And number two is to present us with a contract to say, can we do anything we want to you? Sign here. And we get that piece of paper and we say, yes, you can. Signed, yours sincerely, Neil Kramer. Do whatever you want to me. That's the control system. That's what it is. Because every density that you ascend to, you have to respect the law of free will in a much more stringent way than the preceding ones. So whilst the lion might kill a zebra and it doesn't have to ask it to kill it, a fourth dimensional entity has to ask Neil Kramer if it can mess with me. And I have to say yes. Okay. And that
Yep.
acknowledgement, that consent,
Yep.
until you begin your spiritual journey, is being given by saying nothing. Nothing is the same as yes.
Silence. Yeah.
Silence is consent, as the old anarchists used to say, and there's a truth in that. There's something in that. So we have to start to exercise our free will, and as you begin that process, you begin to disentangle yourself from that equation of predation, and you become, and I say this kind of humorously, but there's a serious point, you become very unappetizing to them. Like George Kavasilis, when he was 16, might have been a juicy morsel, but now, as a man of spiritual learning, is very unappetizing. So they're not interested because your frequency is no longer low. It's not a low resonance, so you are not food anymore.
Yeah, and they're continually trying to get me back down into those other frequencies by I experience injected mind loops, thought loop programs into my mind. It's really quite amazing when we become consciously aware of our own thought processes, and we end up realizing and identifying that we're having thoughts that we don't want to be having. It's quite fascinating when we get into that level of self-awareness, and it's a very powerful thing. This you've articulated it just magnificently, Neil, and the connection that these beings have to our human race, that they are actually feeding off us. It is, well, to me, it's very refreshing to hear someone like you articulate it in the way you have. We do say the same things, and yeah, go on, please go on.
Well, to be honest, I came across this knowledge not through someone else's work, but through my own experience. And I've had my first encounter with what Castaneda and certain Mesoamerican shamanic people would call inorganic beings. I had my first encounter with that in very early on in life as a teenager, and thought, what the hell is that? What is this thing which has presented itself to me? And it's the aspect of it in a physical sense when it chooses to take form. It's ironic is that it's like a black hole. It's like an empty space. It's like a mini black hole that presents itself. That's the visual aspect of it. And its emotional resonance is one of bottomless hollowness, of utter disregard for divinity, utter disregard for it. And that it feels as close as hell to evil that you could possibly imagine. I don't really philosophically buy the idea of evil, but if ever there was evil, it's the closest you could ever feel to it. It's like an extreme absence of light, an extreme absence of the harmony of life. It's just none at all, and it's this great emptiness. And I experienced one of these just like without request, without any sort of magical operation, nothing. It just came, right? And no doubt there's some theme there that I'm not cognizant of at the moment, that maybe one day I'll understand why that happened. But I had that encounter, and I've had it another 4 times since with different entities, excuse me, spontaneously. And so I've made it part of my business to say, well, what is that? Rather than just being afraid and doing everything possible to stop it, I'm like,
Let's
here
understand
I
it.
am sat in the jungle, and like a panther has just gone past, and obviously you're gonna have a moment of pause there, But rather than just running away, I thought, well, what is that? Why is it here? And why is it stalking me? And why is it observing me? And I think I know the answer to some of those questions now, but these things happen, and they are mythologized, and they are put into the context of psychological illness and mental illness. And a lot of people who would bring such an account to the table professionally to a psychiatrist would be given medication, would be given pharmaceuticals if they offered this story up. So one of the issues with this kind of material is, and I come across this in my teaching work, is where do you go? Who do you talk to with this stuff? You know, do you go and talk to the tarot lady down the high street? You know, do you speak to some author or speaker, or do you go to, you know, the funny shamanic man who lives in a cave? You know, who do you talk to? What do you do about these things? There's no conversation in the public space where these things can be discussed. So it's been largely ignored, and that, as I said, is part of the strategy of the 4D negative entity, is to say our biggest weapon is the invisibility of us, is the fact that in mainstream consciousness we don't exist. That's their big weapon.
And
so the first, go on.
I think one of their greatest weapons too has to be what I've discovered for myself as an interface that they use, and the interface of this synthetic light, of this self-serving, authoritarian, self-righteous light, their own version that they've created of this light energy, which is the energy behind these religious organizations that solicit worship, because it's part of the feeding mechanism. For me, this guise that they come through with, this interface of light, and the I would say these beautiful deific figures that they present as well, in the way that they present them. You know, it's, for me, this has been probably the most disturbing aspect to uncovering the infrastructure that has been imposed onto humanity, this interdimensional and multidimensional, multi-realm infrastructure. And
yeah, that's very sobering thought, and I have to agree with, you know, everything you've just said, really, that it's very disappointing, upsetting, disturbing to see people in the act of worship, for me. Period. I've never felt right about that. And if, again, let us say there are these magnificent beings, these ascended masters or whatever, and let's take the example of Jesus or Christ or whatever, and there's this being who has been given to mankind as this savior, and here he is, full of light and amazingness and infinite love and all these wonderful things. And if he appeared in this room now to me and said, Kramer, you little shit, you know, who do you think you are? I am Christ, and I know everything. And how dare you belittle my father's law and the Christian ordinance? How dare you? I'd just say, it's time for you to leave now. Thanks, bye. I don't buy that. What feels better to me is that Christ appears, not that he would single me out for any reason, but let's say he did for some reason, and say, hey, Kramer, how you doing? I'm Christ. And I'd be like, whoa, incredible, amazing. Hey, I've read your stuff. You know, it's really quite interesting. You know, I've heard a lot about you. Wow, nice to meet you. You know, I'd love to talk. Let's get the wine and fish out and let's have a conversation. You know, you know, that's my attitude, and I would expect that any ascended being would think, this is great. You know, a confident human who is humble and polite and courteous and hospitable, but also interested to learn and you know, to listen. You know, that'd be my attitude. If he said, yeah, that's cool, but oh, just by the way, just get on your knees and worship me. Again, I'd have to show him the door. Do you know what I mean? I'd say, look, I don't do that, mate. I just don't do that.
Yeah.
And I really don't feel in my bones that the creator of the universe would require any worship whatsoever. The term has been misconstrued. What really I feel is being said in early Christian literature and early
Yeah.
Jewish Judaic literature, worship is a form of communion. And if you go back from that, communion is a form of connection. It's a form of transcendent communication. It's a form of interdimensional discovery. But you can't say that to peasants in Europe and the East 2000 years ago. So they use different words. They say worship, but worship isn't worship. No worship is required anywhere, anytime, anyone in the universe, unless, of course, it's Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin, where it is obviously completely okay. I will worship Jimmy Page as a guitarist. But apart from that, no worship is required anywhere. That's the only exception, right? And I think that if people considered that for a minute, to think, do you seriously think that Christ would come back and require anybody to worship him? Or would he come back and say, okay, folks, let's evaluate where we're up to. What have you been up to? What have you been doing? How have you grown? How have you discovered more of yourself? Have you become better men and women? Are you raising your families with honor and sincerity and integrity? Are you doing those things? Are you changing? Are you growing? Are you moving towards the divine source in your own independent, self-determined ways? Using some of the principles I might have shared with you, but is that what you're doing? Because if the answer is yes, I'm your biggest fan. You know, that's what a creator it makes sense to me at our level
Yeah.
is going to support our growth through encouragement, not through insisting on our deference to them or our worship or our bended knee. I think whenever that comes into play, you get the smell of the negative entities, of
You do.
the demons, of the authorities, of the archons, of whatever you want to call them. You know, you get the whiff of that wherever there is bended knee, there's something wrong.
Yeah, and that bended knee doesn't just mean literally getting down on your knees. Worship comes in so many sophisticated ways now because these entities are no dummies. They have really, really mastered these types of programs. Just to transcend this energy that we've been sharing, this wisdom we've been sharing, and a necessary part of the wisdom of the overall understanding and knowledge and grasping the structure and infrastructure of life that we've chosen to partake in. We also need to know our divine nature and know how we do have the power to transcend the programs. We do have the power because in a way these programs are designed either to lure you into them or to funnel you back towards you. So when we do get these subtle feelings inside of ourselves, we are now left with a choice as to which direction we're going to take this journey next. And Neil is all about funneling people, bring about an awareness to help funnel people back towards themselves, back to their own divine nature, their own divine sovereignty, and so we can function from this divine will. And we do have the power within us, don't we, Neil?
We do. It's the big optimistic vision here is that it's a good outcome and it's a good story. And being here is pretty special because you learn so many things that are going to be so advantageous and incredible for further on in the journey, in other realms, in other worlds. And one is going to look back on this part and say, "Wow, do you remember being on Earth in the 20th and 21st century? Holy cow, that was an adventure. Do you remember that? Do you remember all those dynamics? Oh my gosh, what an incredible, incredible chapter that was. That was amazing." And that's the view to hold dear and close to us and say, yeah, it's part of the adventure. And there is a darkness, but our very presence here gives us the opportunity to neutralize some of that and do our bit to not only focus on our growth which is number one. But through that growth, through fixing ourselves, we inherently and effortlessly begin to fix that which is around us. So if you create harmony in yourself, everywhere you go, you spread a little bit of that harmonic resonance with you, and you change the infrastructure as you move through it without any sermons or books or speech necessary, just your very being. If you embody harmonic resonance, i.e., balance, appreciation, knowledge, insight, as I say, these old words, dignity, nobility, honor, respect of yourself and what is around you, it physically changes everything that you do. It physically changes the world around you. The structure, the very particulate structure of the world is affected by that. It's affected, the resonance of it is affected by that. And so the genius of having this problem with this part of the solar system, this part of the galaxy, and the genius of having it as a training school, and the genius of having those two things work together is very clever, because that pattern that's gone wrong here, where there's this predation of consciousness, no doubt there's instances of that elsewhere. So if we can figure out a way of dealing with that here, guess what? It's useful throughout the universe. And it becomes like an epic piece of work that we all contribute to, where perhaps 1 million fine men and women have together solved the problem of negative entity predation and dominion, and say, well, I'll tell you what, we'll help you get out of that mess if you stop predatory behavior, because we've figured it out. And you begin to then neutralize the positive and the negative interplay. The game can cease because you've understood the principles of the game, like you've understood the principles of a game of chess so well that you understand the whole thing, the whole dynamic, every move ever that could ever be made. You are Gary Kasparov, and you don't need to play anymore because you have internalized the point of chess. You understand it now. So you can sweep away that board and all the pieces. There's no need for it anymore. You've understood it. You transcend it now. And that's what transcendence is. You have to fully engage with it before you can move on from it.
Yeah, so important, these last few statements. My goodness, Neil, because so many people are suffering disillusionment and they have this resentment towards their existence here, and they're too frightened to engage in life. They're withdrawing, and they don't realize the importance of actually turning around and coming back in and engaging. But you do it when you're ready to do it. You do it when you've attained the wisdom and you are empowered to engage far better than you have been ever before. And don't don't live in fear. Just live in confidence and trust of your own divine will and your own divine nature. You do have everything it takes. And Neil promotes that, propagates that, and shines bright with that. Just listen to the way he speaks, the way he articulates himself. I think is a fine, shining example of what it means to be genuine and authentic and real and honest. And I continue to learn all the time, and I learn a great deal from you, Neil. You're one of my greatest teachers, and I want you to know that. And I appreciate you being here and being a part of my life and everyone's life here on the planet at this time. It's a very important time indeed for everyone involved, and we all have wisdom to share. And get out there and shine your beautiful light and be your authentic self. So, mate, once again, give us the details of your website that people can go to and further explore your work.
Sure, thank you. neilkramer.com is my website, and my book, The Unfoldment, and my workshop, audio downloads. There's an audio book on there, the Audio Cleaver, Unfoldment, Secrets and Sinks workshop, all kinds of essays and interviews and material and videos and stuff. So, yeah, please have a look at that, neilkramer.com. And yeah, thank you, George. Thanks for the opportunity to share this information and to listen and learn and teach and just dialogue and converse. It's so important, and I thank you for what you're doing as well, and hopefully I'll see you again soon.
Yeah,
in the
we
flesh.
will. Yeah, I'll be looking to head over to your neck of the woods, hopefully towards the end of the year, and do some
Brilliant.
workshops
All
there.
right.
So, really looking forward to catching up with you too.
Great.
Neil, thank you once again. You are definitely keeping it real. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, this has been another brilliant episode of Super Woo Radio. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Shine bright.